Welcome to Unit 4 for PE 551. This unit's title is Unit and Lesson Planning. We will be paying special attention to how to create personal and social responsibility type lessons. Physical education and coaching are much more than teaching sports related or physical skills. We are trying to teach people or educate people to become physically literate in the areas of taking responsibility for their own behaviors as well as their team's behaviors. As we're going through this lesson, please remember the 4 C's of Common Core: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. How do you think these 4 overarching components relate directly to the California PE standards as well as your coaching standards? Why do we teach personal and social responsibility? As your book states, we may not be able to change the student athlete's circumstances, but we can change or help to change their view on the circumstances. Please open up your California PE standards in a separate window. If you need a moment to do this, please pause this recording and restart it when you have done so. We will be looking specifically at High School Course 1, Standard 3. High School Course Standard 3, overarching standard, states that students demonstrate knowledge of psychological and sociological concepts, principles, and strategies that apply to learning and performance of physical activity. We are going to relate the overarching Standard 3 for high school courses 1, 2, 3, and 4 directly to Chapter 6's Personal and Social Responsibility theme. So we can keep these standards in mind when you are creating either a unit that could be all about personal and social responsibility or specific lesson planning that incorporates personal and social responsibility throughout. We'll also be discussing how to design either your lesson or your curriculum to be conducive to setting up a learning environment or climate that promotes self and social responsibility. So again, let's look at Standard 3 and let's break it down. Standard 3 is broken down into self-responsibility as the first part. So let's look at 3.1. You want your students or your athletes to be able to accept personal responsibility and create and maintain a physically and emotionally safe and non-threatening environment for physical activity. 3.2 states that the student will act independently of negative peer pressure during physical activity. 3.3 states that the student will identify and evaluate personal psychological responses to physical activity. 3.4 states that the student will describe the enjoyment, self-expression, challenge, and social benefits experienced by achieving one's best in physical activities. 3.5 states that the student will develop personal goals to improve one's performance in physical activity. How would you go about creating a lesson and then assessing this information? Let's start back down at 3.5. Develop personal goals to improve one's performance in physical activity. That takes a lot of self-reflection. It can be assessed through either a portfolio or journal format. But it also takes prerequisite knowledge of what the students consider as their performance level, establishing a baseline for them, and then knowing how to increase upon that skill. 3.4 states that the student needs to describe the enjoyment, self-expression, challenge, and social benefits experienced by achieving one's best in physical activity. This, again, could all be part of a journal where the students are doing self-reflective exercises. You could also have the students verbally describe their enjoyment and self-expression, as well as any challenge that they may be having in the class. 3.3, identify and evaluate personal psychological responses to physical activity. This too can be established in a written journal, but then we also want to remember again to the 4 C's: communication, which definitely is done in a written journal, but then the collaboration. Some students might not feel comfortable enough to engage in group dialogue, but you may want to start having students that you know do feel comfortable in self-expression start sharing in small groups. 3.2, act independently of negative peer pressure during physical activities. You could be giving your students, as well as your athletic coaching students, scenarios or case studies of situations where students are receiving negative peer pressure during a game play, then having the students collaborate together on what a appropriate feedback or reaction would have been or should be in that specific situation. You could even have students create actual lessons or their own case studies, or even do some role playing. This would be a great idea for role playing assessment. 3.1, accept personal responsibility and create and maintain a physically and emotionally safe and non-threatening environment for physical activity. This could be having the students have their own buy-in for what are the repercussions for negative physical reactions or emotional reactions. So having the students set up their own repercussions and then holding the whole class responsible for those. Continuing with High School Course 1 Standard 3, continuing with the subcategory of social interaction, let's look at 3.6. Discuss the changing psychological and sociological needs of a diverse society in relation to physical activity. This also could be related to a cultural diversity unit and be compared with other courses related in language arts, social studies, as well as history courses. This can be done within group activities or in self-reflection activities or related to specific assessments that you have created. You could also have students again do role play and more group interaction. 3.7, analyze the role that physical activities play in social interaction and cooperative opportunities in the family and the workplace. Again, you can look at this country by country, or you can look at this by area throughout the United States. So what major physical activities are most popular within certain cultures or different countries, and then what does this play in social interaction and cooperative opportunities? 3.8, recognize the value of physical activity in understanding multiculturalism. How does sports and physical activity bring together individuals from different cultural backgrounds, religious, and personal philosophy backgrounds? Give specific examples. Subcategory of High School Course 1, Standard 3, Group Dynamics. 3.9 states that the student or athlete needs to recognize and evaluate the role of cooperation and positive interactions with others when participating in physical activity. 3 states that the student needs to identify and utilize the potential strengths of each individual in physical activities. You can always combine standards create an overall larger, more in-depth lesson, or you can take each of these standards and make them their own lesson. It's all part of your entire curriculum, so it's up to you. Again, let's look at 3.9. So how could you have students in your physical education or your coaching team recognize and evaluate the role of cooperation and positive interactions with others when participating in physical activity? You could have the students do self-assessments as well as group assessments for this activity. You can have them give specific examples of maybe scenarios or videos that they have found on YouTube or Google. You can have them analyzing physical activity or the physical education class that they are actually in. You can have students analyzing and giving specific examples that they have seen of positive cooperation, positive physical interactions within the physical education class or their coaching or their team, their specific sports teams. And then again, making sure that they give specific examples of the emotion or the act of cooperation or the specific positive interaction, and then the outcome that was received by the classmates or the team members from that specific cooperation or positive interaction. 3.10 states identify and utilize the potential strengths of each individual in physical activity. So this really makes sure that these students are looking at a lens of positivity. So they're not looking at what their fellow physical education students or athletic team members, they're not looking at their downfalls or what they're lacking. They're looking at the strength that they can bring to the group. Is it the fellow classmates or athletic team members' ability to communicate? Is it their ability to collaborate with others? Do some people really think outside of the box? Are they being able to be creative thinkers? Are some people real critical thinkers that they're able to think of different scenarios to accomplish that set goal or task that you have given the class? Or some people, if you want to get sports specific for soccer, you can talk about how some people have great cardiovascular endurance, so maybe they would want to be a mid-back because they're going to be going through, they're going to have to be running more than, say, necessarily a forward or a fullback. You might say some people are, better at being goalie. That would be a potential strength of theirs. So really make sure that each person is able to work through the lens of a positive attitude, seeing what everybody's strengths are, which everybody does have a strength, and having them recognize those strengths. Now go on through high school courses 2, 3, and 4 and analyze specifically Standard 3. It is still the same subcomponents that we have been speaking about for high school course 1. What progression of personal and social responsibility do you see? How can you create lessons or curriculum out? Take time to think about how you can create a physical education lesson and or a unit on responsibility, either for personal and group, but it really should include both. For our online courses, I want you to think about this in depth and spend a lot of time going through each of these standards. If you are online and you see that other people or other classmates are online at the same time as you, participate in a Google Chat, or you can participate in the blog that is happening right there, and you guys can talk about it together. If you're in class, this is time for a breakout session, and you will be analyzing high school courses 2, 3, and 4 collectively as a class, or in groups broken up into the high school courses 2, 3, or 4, and then participate in a group share after all standards and subparts of the standard have been analyzed. Continuing with information from your chapter 6 of your main textbook, it is important that when you're setting up your curriculum and your instruction to be facilitating lessons that incorporate personal and social responsibility, that your teaching or your coaching style is conducive to the needs of that student, that sets up a positive atmosphere or climate. You want to lower the affective filter of the students. So have an emotional wall up. So when I say lower their affective filter, you want to lower the emotional filters, able to want to emotionally respond and participate like you want them to do. You want to facilitate deep learning and a lot of self-reflection so that you are helping people become more socially responsible and personally responsible for their interactions in the physical activity and physical education environments. Go to page 169 of your textbook and let's go over the situation A or B scenario. So, which of the following strategies of instruction would promote more responsibility? Situation A or situation B? Situation A. The teacher assigns each child to one of 4 similar sized groups. Situation B. Students assign themselves to one of the 4 groups with the following parameters. Each group must contain at least 2, but no more than 4 boys. Someone wearing the color green must be in each group. At least 2 members of each group must have the same favorite desserts, and each group must contain at least 7 members. The key part to remember about this or notice about this is that situation A could definitely be the easiest way for time-wise, right? But what we're trying to do here, your main objective, you as a teacher or a coach, is to facilitate student or team member interaction and have them actually speak to each other, right? So the nice part about situation B is that there are specific parameters. The book gives a lot of great examples of how you could do this, but what are some other ways that you could do a situation B with some different parameters? Things to think about when you are setting up parameters for students getting themselves into groups. So say, for example, this parameter, this example gives you that each student must be wearing green. Well, if you're going to say that you want a group that you have to have at least one person wearing green, you need to do an overview that there are that many people wearing that specific color that you need to have for that many groups. So if you know that you're going to inevitably need 6 groups, you need to make sure that there's at least 6 people in that class wearing green. So just for example. Now, standard situation A, again, is very easy to do. One thing that could be negative about this is, again, not having enough differentiation between your learners. People aren't having a chance to collaborate with each other like they are in situation B. Having the students find out that what each other's favorite desserts are and have to have 2 with the same of the favorite desserts shows a lot of interaction that you're going to have between your students. So as your book says, anything that a child should do and can do, but what we do for them takes away an opportunity to learn responsibility. So in this scenario, how would you incorporate a student living with disabilities? You have students that are verbal or nonverbal. You have students that have social issues. Maybe a student living with autism might not be inept or able to engage without some prompting or help to start in this scenario B. So how could you help this student? You can make sure that if the student does have an instructional aid, that you're front loading or giving the instructional aid information about how you're going to be having the students pair up in groups that week. So you can have the instructional aid actually help the student engage in conversation, and making sure that the student is answering the questions that are being proposed to them by other students. If the aide actually knows those answers and the student is unable to answer for themselves, that person can give the answer for the student. You could pair the student living with a disability with a higher functioning peer that knows that student very well, and you could help the student interact that way. Or you could place a student on a team and then engage the rest of the team with that student in conversation and assign each of a different member of that team to ask one of the questions to your student living with a disability. It all depends on the severity of the disability of that student. If you do have any particular questions about specific disabilities and how to engage these students, you can ask me, or you can also ask any of your fellow students in this class that are adapted PE teachers. Continuing with Chapter 6, look at the strategies that are given to you to facilitate responsibility on pages 170 as well as 171, and then continue to 172. These strategies should be reflected and be able to be seen within the lesson plans that you are creating as part of your unit plans. How are you doing this so far? Share with each other. Chapter 7, the skill theme approach. Skill themed approach is referred to as a developmental model for curriculum development. So it's focusing on lessons and units that are worked around where the students and the athletes are developmentally. Sometimes the student's chronological age may differ, so where they actually are age-wise. A person chronologically 7 years, 0 months may be developmentally lower or higher. Either way, the developmental model is able to work with students and athletes of all different ages within the same developmental area. Typically, though, students that are in kindergarten, first grade, second, third, all the way up through 12th grade in the same grade level are consistent developmentally wise with that grade level. Occasionally, there are some outliers. Skill should be experienced in a variety of contexts. Contexts referring to experiencing the skill in a variety of environments and situations, rather than experiencing the skill in only one setting. So, for example, jumping and landing has many forms, and experiencing how jumping and landing can be carried out through different sporting activities and lesson plans across different settings rather than in a singular, narrow setting of a particular sport. So not having a soccer unit or baseball unit or football or swimming unit, we're talking specifically about the skills that a person should be able to do at a certain developmental level. The skill-themed approach establishes physical education's focus on the acquisition of specific skills in a variety of contexts. The skill-themed approach can be a very valuable approach to designing curriculum. It makes sure that all students, regardless of chronological age or grade level, are able to access the specific skills required in the PE standards all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade. The curriculum is designed to promote competency in a variety of locomotor as well as non-locomotor and manipulative skills. It provides developmentally appropriate experiences and instructionally appropriate experiences reflecting the needs and interests of students over the span of the elementary school years. When we start to get into the junior high and high school years, skill acquisition is not the focus. Because it is expected that the student in junior high and high school has already acquired those basic fundamental skills, which is what the skill theme approach focuses on. When we get into the junior high and high school years, it becomes about how to apply these foundational or fundamental skills into more complex and team-like situations. So, the skill themes approach, what is it not? Our book notes that the skill theme approach is not the selection of a sport and teaching the skills of the sport followed by playing the game. That is not the skills-based approach. It is not the selection of the activity for that day. Remember, we're thinking about a whole scope and sequence. You need to see the big picture. The physical education as a feeder program for middle school physical education and sports. So your skill-themed approach when doing curriculum designing, so when designing a particular unit within your curriculum that is focusing on acquiring a specific set of skills, that should not be modeled after activities that you know are going to be played in the junior high or high school that you know your elementary school will be feeding into, or perhaps the athletic program that you're teaching or heading, making sure that the skills are imperative and relate directly to the developmental of the students that you're working with, not trying to pair it specifically with maybe a varsity type sport, working on where those children are developmentally right now. The skill theme is teaching skills and concepts for understanding, mastery, and application. It is the selection of content appropriate for children at their developmental levels. It recognizes a variety of developmental levels within a single class. So you need to make sure that you are allowing for differentiation in your instruction that accommodates for the different developmental levels within an age group that you are teaching or coaching. It is a combination of skills and movement concepts, building bridges between skill acquisition and application. So going back to our the four C's for Common Core, it has to deal more with the critical thinking components. So taking the actual skill and learning where and specifically that skill should be applied. Example 7.2 is on dribbling. Now, remember, for skill-themed approach, it's all developmental. So the whole purpose of skill-themed approach is to teach the students to acquire the skill to be able to do it correctly and then apply it across a variety of settings. So we have the skills and then the concept. So here's the acquiring of the skill and then the application of the skill. The skills, you can see they progress, starting with traveling all the way down to striking with long implements. Then as well as with concepts, understanding self and general space, down to understanding different terminology, forces, flow. There's one in particular point in this concepts that I would like to reiterate with you, directions. This also does relate back to our California PE standards, specifically the kindergarten standards that speak about directions. But forward, backward, right, left, up, down, clockwise, counterclockwise is sometimes something that we take for granted that students automatically know. So no matter what your unit may be, it is always good to have a review of terminology or vocabulary that is specific to the lesson that you are going to be discussing. So if you are doing a skill-based thematic approach all about understanding directions and how their body relates to those directions, make sure that you review that vocabulary. So for example, if it is imperative to your lesson that students know which direction is right and which direction is left, you should do a review of making sure that the students know which hand is their right hand, which hand is their left hand. So let's role play here. You are the student, I am the teacher. Okay, student, please hold up your left hand. Hold up your left hand for me now. Right. Do you see how that verbal feedback can be very confusing? If you request a student to hold up their left hand, tell them that is correct and take out the word right, because then the student's going to be confused. They think that they're holding up the left hand, which would have been correct, but if you give them the feedback of right, they're going to be confused and probably adjust hands. So that is just a little bit of teacher feedback from my behalf to yours to make sure that when you are teaching directions, you're giving the correct amount of feedback as well as testing for prerequisite knowledge. Let's talk about the overarching standard one, specifically for kindergarten, and then we're going to show a progression of standard one throughout the grade levels. So overarching standard one, students demonstrate the motor skills and movement patterns needed to perform a variety of physical skills. Of course, all of the standards for physical education relate directly to the skill themed approach, and you can make it be however you would it to. But let's look specifically at movement concepts. This is one of the subcategories within Standard 1. Now, movement concepts is only mentioned in Standard 1 for grades K through 3. Grades 4 through 6, movement concepts moves into standard 2 because it becomes a higher level of thinking. So developmentally speaking, movement concepts is more appropriate in standard 1 where you're actually having students do, so they are acquiring the skill. Then in grades 4 through 6, it moves up in difficulty, so the developmental level becomes more advanced, and it becomes into conceptualizing or performing the skill. So let's look again here. Movement concepts, standard 1. You should have your California PE model content standards up and off to the side that you can be scanning through this with me. So 1.1, travel within a large group without bumping into others or falling. 1.2, travel forward and sideways while changing direction quickly in response to a signal. 1.3, demonstrate contrast between slow and fast speeds while using locomotor skills. So skipping, slow, fast, running, slow, fast, leaping, slow, fast, running, galloping, you name it, different locomotor skills of different speeds. Sometimes we have students that have just one speed, and that's a speed at whatever they feel they want to go at. This is why it's important that we teach them different speeds, slow, fast. The different terminology can change for those as well, since let's take running. Well, running can be different for slow and fast, such as jog, which would be slow. Running would maybe be medium speed, and then fast would be sprinting. 1.4, create shapes at high, medium, and low levels by using hands, arms, torso, feet, and legs in a variety of combinations. So we would take these skills and then apply them across a different amount of settings. Some of these settings then could be applied into maybe specific sport later on in life, such as creating shapes at high, medium, and low levels, would be bringing yourself into athletic action, all the way up into a jumping position to block someone in baseball. Basketball is just an idea of how this can be applied across different settings. So here is movement concepts again. We're focusing on the skill-based approach, which is developmentally based. So the difference between kindergarten and third grade, as I mentioned before, the movement concepts term is only used in standard 1 grades, kindergarten through third grade. After third grade, it moves down to standard 2. But I wanted to give you a side-by-side comparison how skills progress over the developmental period. So here again is kindergarten standard 1 movement concepts, which lists standards 1.1 through 1.4. It's broken down much further and allows for students at a younger developmental age level to have the skill broken down smaller, which is then easier for them to understand and apply. Then you can see that it advances the grade levels, which are compared to the developmental levels. And then in grade 3, the student is developmentally expected to be able to take all of the subcomponents, so you can see 1 through 4, and combine them into just one standard. So grade 3 has, in movement concepts, there's only one standard for movement concepts in grade level 3, which is 1.1. The student should be able to chase, flee, and move away from others in a constantly changing environment. So this could be games of tag, and you can think about it in sports also, soccer, baseball, basketball. All of these components are found in many different tag-like or chase and flee type games. But again, you can see in kindergarten there's 4 standards for movement concepts. Grade 3, there's only 1 standard for movement concepts. It's been down much further, and the grade levels, as they increase, there's actually a less amount of standards because the student is expected to be able to conceptualize and apply with not as much of a breakdown. Here's another example of a skill progression. So we're still with movement concepts. As we said before, movement concepts is found across all of the grade levels. However, it advances developmentally. So before, in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade, you found it specifically in standard 1 only, where it was broken down into smaller levels, smaller components, and the student was expected to physically be able to do it. Now we're moving up into a higher developmental level, grade 4, when the student is expected to now synthesize this information. So you can see some of the key terms even within the standards, that the standard starts off with explain, describe, analyze. We're moving up into more the critical thinking component. So look at grade 4 standard 2. This is specifically for movement concepts. There's 2 components. There's 2 standards there for movement concepts for grade level 4. 2.1, the student is expected to explain the difference between offense and defense. 2.2, the student is expected to be able to describe ways to create more space between an offensive player and a defensive player. Again, it's not necessarily sport specific, but understanding these concepts can be carried out across all settings, all physical activity, all physical education, as well as all sports settings, because you should, no matter what kind of setting you're in, should be able to explain the difference between offense and defense. And no matter what kind of setting that you're in, you should be able to explain how to create more space between an offensive player and a defensive player. So again, this goes back for the whole important part of doing a skill-themed thematic approach, is that to be able to take one skill and apply it across all settings. Grade 6, standard 2. There's actually more standards for grade 6, but let's look how it breaks down. 2.1, explain how to increase force based upon principles of biomechanics. 2.2, explain how impact force is reduced by increasing the duration of impact. 2.3, analyze and correct errors in movement patterns. So this could be self-analyzing as well as having somebody paired with a partner and doing some peer analyzation. 2.4, provide feedback to a partner to assist in developing and improving movement skills. This can go back to last unit's topic of social responsibility and making sure that the student understands how to give positive feedback. So not just feedback, but positive feedback to a partner to assist in developing and improving movement skills. The key words here, assist in developing and improving. 2.5, identify practices and procedures necessary for safe participation in physical activities. This also goes back to our unit, great, for chapter 6, talking about social responsibility. Chapter 7 provides you with examples of how the skill themes and the national standards, the NASP standards, relate directly to each other. I've provided 2 of these examples for you. So Standard 1. Standard 1 of NASP states that a student, a physically literate individual, is able to demonstrate competency in motor skills and movement patterns needed to perform a variety of physical activities. Well, the definition of Standard 1 is still the same definition of a skilled themed approach. So skilled themed approach is to design, develop competency, not to just introduce them. Not just to say, here's the skill and move on. You need to make sure that the student has developed competency and competency across a variety of physical activities. So here's an example for you from your book. Dribbling a basketball starts from being self-paced or static, then progresses to dynamic across game-like situations. Standard 2. This is how the skill themes approach relates directly to NASP Standard 2. The physically literate individual is expected to demonstrate understanding of movement concepts, principles, strategies, and tactics as they apply to learning performance of physical activities. So here is the example that your book gives you. After children attain a working knowledge of pathways, body management, time, etc., so directions, right, left, up, down, around, over, through, they combine these skills into tactical dribbling and dynamic gameplay. This also goes back to what we were learning about in Standard 4, where the student should be able to explain between offense and defense and being able to open up space between a person on the opposing team or their own team. It all relates directly back to this example and Standard 2.